surveillance in the AI era. In this era where we are, digital technologies are deeply embedded in our lives. It becomes increasingly apparent the power struggles and dynamics embedded in these same technologies, and in how we as a society conceive and dispute them. While we more and more face technologies designed to reinforce control, surveillance, and the concentration of wealth, we also know about... We lost Chelsea. A gente perdeu a Chelsea.
I'm still here.
Great. Your image was not here, but it's great that you're there. You're back. Your full you is back. We also know about and reclaim technology's ability to enable or facilitate collective construction, resistance, and change. Technological sovereignty has gained steam against this backdrop, and technological sovereignty, the one we defend, must be shaped through notions of collective self-determination and social justice in order to fulfill its purposes. And we see that in Cryptorave t-shirts here talking about digital and popular sovereignty. Otherwise, it risks being reduced to a purely state sovereignty detached from social participation, democratic values, and human rights guarantees, or reduced to economic incentives for unicorns and local tech industries also detached from privacy, other human rights, and environmental concerns. As part of this context, data and the infrastructures of how data is collected, is stored, shared, cross-referenced, inferred, grouped, and generally used are crucial elements for building collective knowledge, but also for entrenching domination and perpetuating pernicious logics over how we understand and act upon reality. As the introduction of this session emphasized, today, emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and decentralization of data are threatening the autonomy and digital rights of individuals, communities, and nations. State and corporate enhanced surveillance and how they are often intertwined are crucial aspects of the power and control we are talking about. And we want to hear more from Chelsea. So Chelsea, do you have any intro remarks, or can we go directly to the questions?
Yeah, sure. I'll give a little introduction. I have. It's funny that I'm essentially doing a privacy event. It's particularly a privacy event. Can you hear me?
Pode aumentar pouquinho? I think it can be louder if. But yeah,
okay.
We can.
Okay, is that louder?
Yeah, now it's better. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So basically, I spent the last couple years doing security work, talking about privacy and surveillance and things like that. And obviously, the context of sort of the geopolitical, mess that we've been in, which has been. This is not a surprise. Like we obviously 10 years ago we were warning people. We were saying like, hey, we're in this interconnected world, internet and technology. We're increasingly connected. There's a amount of flow of information. But we sort of saw the warning signs of the exploitation of information by state actors and corporations and the blending of the two that we do in the United States, in Silicon Valley. And so I've been working in this space, and I've been operating in this space, and I've been talking in this space for quite some time. And I think it's funny that I'm speaking at a photography and a privacy event one more time, because I have personally been going through my own sort of reflective period. Now that we're here, now that we're in an era where the information has essentially already been collected. Already enormous amounts of information about humanity, about society, have obviously been vacuumed up by a few very wealthy and powerful people, and they've made a lot of money doing that. They've accumulated a lot of wealth, and they've accumulated a lot of power with that. And now we're here. Where do we go from here? Than trying to warn people about what to do, or to try to prevent that from happening. And obviously, there's been a focus on sort of privacy-enhancing technology. But the problem that I see is that the data already been dumped up, and it really there's less of an interest among Silicon Valley to collect information. They already have large language models, they already have AI models, they've already done this, and now they're trying to have a spaghetti approach to the product that will somehow fire and be important. Everybody's looking for the next iPhone, right? We've seen this with like Meta trying to create the metaverse. We've seen this with OpenAI trying to make ChatGPT into a viable product that generates more revenue than it does compute, which it still hasn't. None of these AI companies have figured out how they can offset compute costs from in terms of like revenue generation and usability. And so we're sort of at a crossroads in history. And I don't know. I've been grappling with this myself. I've been taking time to figure out what does it mean to be human in a time like this. And that's a very different question. Which is not quite. It's not quite the same question that I'm used to answering. What does it mean? Because like technologists have always been sort of lacking in sort of an understanding what to put aside the human element, and it's been some consistent thing that I've said since 2015. At least 2015, whenever I started speaking on these subjects and writing on these subjects. But yeah, now I'm like, okay, like, what are we doing? Like, who are we? Like, what? We've built all of this infrastructure. We've been more connected, and we're generating more content, and we're consuming more content than ever before. And what is it actually doing? And it's not making us happier. It's not making us feel more connected. And because of algorithms, it's almost becoming more isolated. And I'm sort of at a crossroads in my own sort of like of what can be accomplished with technology. And I know that these like glass rectangles have been incorporated into our lives. And I'm reaching a point where I'm just like maybe I don't want it to be incorporated in my life as much as I thought I did 5 years ago, right? And so I have become. I'm not necessarily anti-technology, but I've become skeptical of how much we should integrate it into our lives. And I'm sort of taking a step back, actually, from using technology, and trying to live this. And I don't necessarily have like, I'm not like advocating for this, like I'm experimenting myself. So we're just sort of at a funny moment, and where I'm experimenting more with leaving technology behind, leaving my phone behind when I go out, not interacting with social media as much, not consuming things as much, not consuming information as much, and I feel like it's recently becoming the most empowering thing that we can do. which is connect a little bit. Nothing like don't use technology at all. I'm simply saying like maybe it's time to experiment with connecting a little bit. Which is not a popular thing to say at a technology event, but it's coming from a very real place, which is that I think we need our humanity back, and these like with all the crises in the world and this pivotal moment in world history, I just don't want to be tapping on a glass rectangle all that is happening. I want to be out in the world and experiencing it. It's a beautiful day here in New York, and I want to go to the park. Just sort of spend time with people, and I'm realizing more and more like how valuable that is. I've sort of been going on this spiritual journey with my relationship with technology, because I feel increasingly like there are very rich, very powerful people who have invested an enormous amount of time and energy and money to get our eyeball time, and they've given us these very convenient little glass silicon rectangles that we keep in our pockets to access that and to be portals of that. And I've decided that as somebody who has spent a considerable amount of time, who has had a considerable amount of time taken away from me, that I don't want I don't want my time to be Jeff Bezos' time. I don't want my time to be Elon Musk's time. I don't want my time to be I don't want my time to be like Zuckerberg's time. I just don't. Like I want my time back, and so I'm finding this relationship with time and technology and meaning and humanity. So that's where I am. I'm sort of grounding it. Like I know people know what I was talking about 5 years ago. I don't know what I'm going to be talking about in the next few years, but I'm working on experimenting with new ideas and some new things. And I haven't like cooked up like a thing yet.
Thank you very much for sharing these reflections. I feel that in one way or another, and perhaps at different extents, this community has been asking the same questions for themselves. So it's very important that we have this moment also to hear from you how you were seeing all of this. And as you were saying, in this world of eyeballs being connected to many devices, and where most surveillance is not done on content, but on metadata, what ethical and political challenges does this form of control raise?
I mean, metadata is extremely important. It's the data about data. I mean, obviously, I feel like a lot of people know what metadata is now, especially those who are at least somewhat privacy conscious. Like, I think the question is like, how do you like what does it mean? What do you do with that? What do you do with like privacy and metadata now? And I don't. Metadata is extremely important for identifying who you are as sort of an entity, like in sort of the simulated model of the world that exists. The electronic sort of overlay, map of who people are, what their interests are, and metadata has been used to identify people. But like you know. Metadata, as much as like metadata has become this incredibly important thing for identifying like aspects and sort of nodes of information about who we are and what our interests are, what our background is, and various predictive indicators. It's not clear to me one of the like weird things about metadata, like especially lately, is that it seems to matter less than it did even just 2 to 3 years ago. Whenever it comes to this technology, because there's just been such a flood of there's been such a flood of I don't know if you've heard of this thing called the theory what is it? Yeah, the internet theory, where it's like it's kind of like this idea, like kind of a meme, which like there's more bots than humans, and so they're very human-like. At least in terms of like interacting on the sort of metadata map of the world, whenever it comes to the internet. But now there's just so many bots, there's so much interactivity, and then people are starting to pull back a little bit from being online because of because of engagement farming, because of communications being surveilled so much, becoming and it's because of scams, really. I mean, there's a lot of targeting for scams and things like that. So like metadata, I feel like was more important. Whenever you have a flood of when you have this flood of fake information created to exploit people, and it's competing with real people. When you have bots that are competing with real people, it's becoming increasingly difficult to sort of identify who is who and what is what. Baudrillard was talking about about the detachment of meaning from the original meaning and the underlying meaning and the sort of copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And I think we're in this like weird space where the topology of the internet, of the old internet, it used to operate 5-10 years ago, is now more and more detached from the reality that we live in, which I think is fascinating. Because like it feels more and more like whenever you're interacting online, it feels more and more like you're this detached sort of amorphous thing that isn't even like detached, that isn't even attached to the real world anymore. I mean, at least that's the sense that I get. And that's the question that I just started grappling with. Is I think 3 to 5 years ago I might have said, we want to protect our data, our metadata, and there are tools that can enable that. And there are extremely vulnerable people that are using technology that need to do this. But I think that in terms of the larger role of society, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure if metadata is quite as valuable as it used to be. Because it used to be that you could kill people on metadata. You still can. But with people sort of disconnecting and then the sort of bot topology of the internet, I'm not sure.
What that, because you're also saying you're also talking about interactions and at what extent the people interactions reflect reality or a reality that they want to create. But what about metadata that we create unwillingly? I think that one kind of metadata that I feel that is particularly sensitive and I see being used and in very concerning ways is location data, for example. And we have here a recent scandal from the Brazilian intelligence agency using exploiting SS7 protocols, which is a telecommunication. It's a protocol used to operate telecommunication networks to track politicians, to track journalists, to track public servants. We also see that very problematic cases in the US, for example, with location data brokers, and how the government, but also private parties have been using location data to harass people in vulnerable situations. So what do you think about data that the fact maybe we have more and more people trying to think about their lives not connected to digital technologies, but it is still pretty much embedded, and we have like the cell phone walking with us everywhere we go, if we have the money to have a smartphone. Of course, there are also, especially in the global south, many people who don't. But how do you think about this kind of data that we generate and we don't actually know that we are generating, and how this can be combined, cross-referenced, and threats that can come from that?
So the data that we're talking about in terms of like locational data, it's tied to your phone. It's tied to your device very often. So it's a detachment from you yourself. So I think one of the obviously you can proof locational data, which was a strategy and a tactic that was sort of developed around 2014 to like 2016, and there was sort of discussions about that. There's like ways to turn off your locational data. There's ways to like with VPNs and with various types of privacy technology to mask your locational data. But there's not a whole lot that you can really do apart from like not using a phone to like get around it. And again, this is like where I'm experimenting. I'm experimenting with not carrying my phone. There's less locational data being transferred about if I'm not carrying that device, right? If it's not on my person, is it difficult? Is it difficult to interact in a highly connected society without your electronic devices? Yes, it can be difficult, and obviously, there are certain purchases that I have to make, and certain apps that I have to use, and things like that. But like, I'm fine. I'm experimenting with ways to like to avoid having to do that, and to figure out how to interact in society. And I think that there are ways that I think that there are ways that we can avoid that. Now the difficulty is biometric data, things like walking, and because facial recognition, there's been a lot of focus on facial recognition technology in terms of like cameras, and then there was a whole discussion about masking, and then you figured out ways around masking. It turns out that walking is actually a better predictor of who you are. So based upon your gait, your sort of gait analysis, like how your feet move, and there are London, Paris, New York City. These are some of the most surveilled cities in the world, where there's cameras everywhere, and there are AI systems that sift through that information and can identify you. So obviously that they're in terms of like avoiding surveillance technology, like that is a factor as well. But like I think that in terms of like an easy thing, try to protect yourself from locational data. Maybe the global south needs to think about, do you really want smartphones everywhere? Is this really a good thing? Because we've developed this stuff in the global north, and we've integrated it into our society, and it's not necessarily being as beneficial as we thought it was.
One particularly problematic issue that we have in the global south is not making these questions properly, or at the extent that we should, especially before many, or in the face of many incentives and economic interests for us to deploy these in our territories, in our population, in our bodies. So the smartphone, I think it's something but we see that with many technologies, as face recognition, government digitalization as a practice that we don't actually ask ourselves, do we need to use all this technology? Will this actually bring all these benefits? So this is a question that, in this context that we are now, we should exercise more. And another thing that it's important to ask you, and also considering what you were talking about, is how is the actual status of surveillance in the US? Could you explain the participation of big tech in this process, since they are a public part of the, since they are, I mean, an important power right now?
So yeah, so basically what has happened in the US that is a big problem. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Now you can hear me. Okay. So basically, one of the biggest problems that we had in the U.S. is that there's been a melding of the private sector, Silicon Valley data collection sort of thing with Amazon, Amazon Web Services in particular, with Microsoft, with Meta, in terms of like infrastructure, providing infrastructure. And one of the things that we've seen, especially, and it's become more visible, it's been happening for about 15 or 20 years in the United States, but it's become extremely visible in the last 6 to 8 months with the new administration, that we essentially have a melding, a sort of corporate government intertwining in that relationship, where the infrastructure that provides the services and tools that government use is privately owned, and that infrastructure is now, like, through government cloud services in particular, is essentially run by the government, but is done on, privately held servers, or in sort of this gray area where it's like contracted out to the government for a period of time. Government has control of it. And so what we've seen with this melding of government and Silicon Valley technology is that we've seen that data is just sort of flowing. It's flowing around. It's this amorphous thing. And as data management techniques have evolved, so it used to be in the 70s and 80s, you would have a SQL database, and it would have tables, and it would have certain types of information. We've sort of become more dependent on unstructured data, on NoSQL databases, on JSON, on sort of like unstructured systems, and that's the kind of data that Silicon Valley has been scooping up and sifting through, and that's what government is. Government is a lot of unstructured data, and so there's been this question as to what is happening with the unstructured data in government as Silicon Valley gets more and more tied into that, and what that means in terms of like the administration, in terms of like administration, bureaucracy, and like how that works with the interaction of people. And it's a very strange thing that's happening, where we're not really sure in the United States where our data is or who controls it anymore. We used to be, we would say, okay, this is my tax data, right? Like the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, is collecting our tax data, and when we file taxes, it's going into a database, and it's being processed so we can do our taxes. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if it's a contractor. I don't know if it's been copied to another government agency. I don't know if another government agency, like when these databases start to get, when they start to use modern Silicon Valley techniques to do that cross-referencing, it's unclear. There's a lot less clarity as to like how it's being used, what's being used, like if it's real anymore. And I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure of the significance of that melding of things whenever it comes to administrative and bureaucratic systems. The United States is really, and to a slightly lesser extent, European Union, because they've been hesitant to jump in all in on this. Although France is now experimenting with this more. Italy is now experimenting with this more. Germany is, I think, a little more skeptical at the moment. But some of these, and I don't know where Brazil is in this, but I know that whenever I've talked to Brazilian people in government, there's been a skepticism, at least in the last couple years, of melding so much infrastructure with Silicon Valley, because we're in this. Because now the United States now has an administration that's very open to just sort of like, okay, Silicon Valley, come in, look at our databases, optimize it, find efficiency, and it's it's unclear what this is going to mean. I do think that the legacy of this melding is going to last longer and expand outwards from the U.S. government. So it's not just going to be like, okay, like this is one it's one presidency in which we're going to have this thing. I think we've sort of permanently opened the Pandora's box here of opening our data up to to sort of extreme privatization, and I don't know what that means. I've tried to predict what that means in terms of like what that means for government, in terms of surveillance, in terms of identifying people, in terms of tracking people. But we're here. I mean, people are being identified, they're being tracked, and these databases have already been produced. It will take 15 to 20 years before these databases are out of date. And so for some people who are young, that data is going to be useful for a very long time, and it's there. And I don't know how you undo. I don't know how you undo the damage that's been done here. And I want to advocate for people to not do this. Don't go down this path, because we don't know where we're going.
Yeah, hearing you, it feels that the U.S. is actually suffering with what global South countries or the majority world countries suffers for. Since technology started to get to us. So and it's important to raise awareness about that and do the criticism and think about better futures and more collective and independent autonomous infrastructures. And Cryptorave is part of this. Cryptorave is part of this collective thinking and collective dreaming of a different technological future. And when it comes to Brazil, although it has increasing public awareness about the same concerns and issues that you share, unfortunately, the push and the pressure and the economic interests involved in these economic moments that we live are usually stronger than that. And we see this coming at different fronts. So public universities now use Google services for different educational and email services. When I just entered this room, there was a woman here very concerned about the fact that Amazon is providing or being part of the infrastructure, processing health data as part of public health services in Brazil. And we have foreign companies also doing, part of the surveillance industry that we have here, which, then this industry shouldn't exist, but as it exists. So these infrastructures, although there is increasing public awareness and concern about that, and plans and projects and public investment thinking on how not to be dependent on foreign and big tech infrastructure to deal with to support our technologies and services, even from the government. This is still far away from being the reality that it should be. This is my impression, at least. So one thing that you told about biometric data, and I think that, I mean, we talk, face recognition is also an important topic here in the country and in the region, in Latin America. But one thing that from a Latin American perspective I wanted to highlight, and it's not directly related to the main big tech that we know, but it relates to the US and this context, is biometric data sharing agreements that we see with many or with important countries in the region, with the US to share this data and the problematic impacts that we already see at the border. So there are, at least with Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, and El Salvador, these data sharing agreements that, although they are not non-binding, they are in place, and we already see episodes of discrimination, criminalization in a way that it shouldn't. And biometric data, we also leave a normalization of collection and processing of biometric data in a way that probably it was unthinkable, some years ago. Here in São Paulo, you go to your doctor appointment in a business building, and you have to sometimes do face recognition in order to get in, and it's so normalized. And you don't know nothing about the security measures involved, or where this data is stored, what they're going to do with that. And right before us, the conversation that was happening before we started here, they were also talking about the private companies doing surveillance and as part of the city public security infrastructure. And we also don't know anything about the data of or how these companies are collecting and processing this data, and perhaps sharing with also the public security agents and so on. And actually, there are including incentives to create a pervasive private and public and private surveillance network, combining private cameras, public cameras, face recognition, automated license plate readers, and all the basket that we have. And there is a very interesting research about that and how this is playing out in Bahia, made by Lapin, which is a research institute here in Brazil. So continuing this conversation, how is artificial intelligence transforming exactly what we are talking about here, the collection, analysis, and use of metadata? Are we facing a new phase of algorithm surveillance, and what technologies can be used to avoid it?
It already happened. So, it's not a hypothetical. That has already happened. We are in an algorithmically driven society. The algorithms are operating, they're growing, they are being optimized. This goes back to one of the things that I think people don't understand about TikTok in particular, as an app, because it's people know what TikTok is, so I'm using it as an example. This is much more across the board, but TikTok as an app, every single interaction that you have, because there's always something going on. You open the app and it's immediately showing you content. You're immediately every single push and every single swipe and every single moment that you are looking at your screen is a moment that is tracked by the app, that is monitored by the app, and it is used. One of the reasons why the TikTok algorithm is so good at entertaining you and finding things that you are interested in without telling it anything. You're not giving it information, but it's just for how long you're looking at the screen and how long it takes for you to swipe. Those you're not putting in, you're not saying oh, I am a woman, I am a Catholic, I'm a Muslim, you're not specifying any demographic information about yourself to these apps, but it is able to predict that based on just simply how long in microseconds, literal microseconds it takes for you to do things on the app. So every single interaction is tracked and collected on some of these apps. So it's the data, this is the algorithmically driven society that we're in. where an app, you don't have to tell an app anything about you, but it figures out who you are, what your interests are, even interests in things that you don't even know that you're interested in, just based on how long you swipe. And how fast you swipe at things. So we're already here. The reality is that we are in an algorithmically driven society already. Politics, algorithmically driven. Engagement farming, algorithmically driven. Pop culture, algorithmically driven. Spotify, the entire industry, the entire music industry is built now to satisfy the Spotify algorithm. YouTube, algorithmically driven content. Every single creator has a plan for how to predict what the YouTube algorithm is going to do in terms of, and you know, they're very focused on there's a lot of YouTube creators will be very focused on things like CTR, click-through rate. There's a lot of jargon. They're like some of the best people. Mr. Beast is a perfect example of a content creator who is an algorithmically driven. He produces content not necessarily because it is what he wants to create, but it's because it's what the consumer through the algorithm will generate the most views, will generate the longest watch time, will generate the longest click-through rate. Thumbnails on apps are a good example of this. And now everything is becoming a thumbnail. It's becoming a, look at this now, look at me now. This is what we've been joking that this is sort of the Mr. Beastification of everything. But it's happening in U.S. politics. There's the Mr. Beastification of U.S. politics, where now U.S. politics is memes. It's it is clickbait. It's sort of like AI generated, funny things. There's a couple of viral images that the U.S. administration here has put out in the last few months. I don't want to specify which images, but the fact that sort of optimized images being used for government now. We are here. This is the algorithmically driven society. This is not a hypothetical. Where do we go from here? Are we entering a new phase of algorithmic surveillance? I'm not sure. It's become so ingrained into at least the in terms of like at least the internet part of society that I'm not sure what that's going to mean. I think that as we move into the 2030s, I think that we may see, hopefully, a sort of slowdown or a decline in the algorithmically driven systems that we have, because there's one thing that algorithmically driven systems produces that that regular sort of, whenever you had television ratings and it was more sort of like less fine-grained and more intuitive and more sort of mainstream, sort of trying to have a debate and have sort of a social, have a society in which there are different viewpoints of things. Not everybody's being siloed, but fatigue, just people are so tired. It is an like if you are on the TikTok app, or if you are on Reels, or if you are on YouTube for an extended period of time, you are exhausted. It is like working out, but you are physically doing nothing. It is a spiritually exhausting experience. And so I think that that's what we're going to have to grapple with. We're going to have to grapple with, how do we push back? How do we interact with an algorithmically driven society, which is here, it's right in front of us. And I'm learning how to do that right now. So I don't have this is the answer. I wish I had here's the blueprint for it. But taking a step back and and turning off from that has been a part of that. Like whenever I said I started here, I don't interact with engagement farm content anymore. I don't, even if I'm interested in it, even if it's intriguing, I'm like, nope. I'm gonna, you know, I'm thinking of consumption of information in the same way as I do food now, where it's like I'm very thoughtful and cautious and moderate, and I moderate my sort of consumption of information. And I don't know if that's the answer. It's one that I'm experimenting with. Maybe there will be some other thing that happens, but I'm wondering if the next phase is how we mitigate and how we interact with algorithmically generated surveillance systems, because they're just so exhausting. They are an anti-human thing. I'm going to go on a slightly more broad rant here, not just talking about algorithms here. Everything has become hostile to human interaction. I don't know if anybody has noticed this, but like, we're in New York City, we're getting rid of park benches and we're putting sculptures that are weird, and so that homeless people could theoretically not lay down on it. But when you go to a restaurant and there's nowhere to sit anymore. I was at a train station, and I had to wait. My train was delayed for like an hour, and I sat down because there was no chairs, there's no benches. So I sat down on the floor, and like a security guard came up to me and was like, "Hey, like, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Waiting for the train. It's a train station, right?" Like we've developed so much hostile architecture that in our society, and that's sort of like what the internet is. It's sort of like what our society has become. It's like hostile to human interaction and human experience. That because unless those seconds can be extracted for some kind of commodification, or there's some kind of monetary gain, or there's some kind of production value to society, like it shouldn't exist. Like that human interaction it shouldn't exist at all. And I really think the fatigue that I'm feeling, the exhaustion that I'm feeling, comes from that. And I don't have an answer, but I do think that, like, whenever it comes to combating, or at least predicting where algorithmically driven, surveillance-driven societies go, I think that there's only pushback to that, because there is a human need, there's something bubbling up from within me that's reacting to that, and I'm still trying to learn and interact with that is, and figure that out for myself. But it is real, and it is there, and I cannot be alone, and I know that I'm not alone.
I like your optimism, but some reflections considering what you said. I can say that here in São Paulo we have many examples of hostile architecture, but I've never had thought about relating it with the push for going to the online or the technological space where you can be datafied, in tandem with not being in the space, in tandem with an architecture that is not welcoming of people in the public spaces. But another thing that is striking, and it's part of our algorithmically driven society, is the fact that also public spaces are being more and more datafied, and our movements in these spaces. So we were talking about facial recognition and automated license plate readers and many other technologies that play this role. And one thing that is striking, considering a human rights perspective on how we deal with surveillance and interference with privacy rights, is that it should be necessary and proportionate, and it should be targeted. But the way that algorithms and AI are being deployed and being part of a pervasive network of surveillance is that technologies that are inherently disproportionate, as face recognition, that means an indiscriminate data collection and an indiscriminate surveillance, are normalized, and our pushback as we have here in Brazil, a campaign against the implementation of face recognition in public security, which is, so I'll say the name in Portuguese, and then I'll give my translation, because I don't know exactly the official translation, if we have one, is tire meu rosto da sua mira. And it's the way to translate that, I would say, take my face out of your sight, or off your aim, or out of your target, something like that. Which involves many Brazilian states, and we fight back the implementation that is just starting here in São Paulo with the Smart Sampa program that actually connects with other layers of surveillance at the state level called Muralha Paulista, at the federal level called Cortex, that cross-references databases from different government databases. And this is another issue that I think it's important to think about, because sometimes we just don't have choice. We just don't have choice to disconnect and to say, I don't want to be algorithmically surveilled. This happens with face recognition, but this also happens with increasingly government digitalization, using automated decision-making and AI to provide public services that people cannot opt out. So this is why I said that I truly like your optimism. But what I see, at least from the perspective of Latin America and Brazil, is our governments looking at a new wave of investments and a way to be developed in the world that we live, wanting to deploy these technologies and develop these technologies without the critical perspective that we are talking about here.
Yes.
This is concerning. And I don't have the answers, but being part of the discussion and raising awareness about that is part of what we should do. And considering that, I would like to ask you, what does it mean to build technological sovereignty today? Is it possible to think about autonomous digital infrastructures in the face of the dominance of major powers and corporations?
That's a great question. It's one that I have. Hello?
Hello, we are here and we hear you.
Okay, cool. So that's a great question. This is a question that I've been personally grappling with for quite some time as well. Which is, what does it mean to have data sovereignty? None of the data that we've been talking about that is very personal, very often very personal, is treated like it's our own at all. And I really, really want there to be a push towards data sovereignty, which the data that you produce is your own data, just as it always has been or assumed to be, right? And I think that I actually have an unusual opinion with respect to large states and corporations in this regard. I do think that they have been huge drivers behind data collection, data surveillance, and they still are. Like, they're pushing into the global south, and they're pushing these technologies that have existed in the United States, in Europe, in East Asia for quite some time. Or at least a few decades, at least, but I'm not 100% convinced that it's actually increasing their sort of hold or power or control. It's certainly making them very wealthy, but I'm not particularly sure that it is equating to political or military strength in the way that I think that it was assumed to. I think that individual and small collective, so like local data sovereignty is going to be extremely important moving forward. And I think that one of the problems that large corporations and large governments and these sort of massive amorphous institutions have is that they're so huge, and they have so much data, and they have they have so much compute power, and they have so much stuff that they sort of unwittingly become like unable to control it all. They have so much, right, but they don't know what to do with it all. They sort of have control over these vast sort of systems, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't know, it's sort of aimless, it's sort of directionless. Like, are we just going to endlessly are we just going to end up with like 3 or 4 trillionaires in 10 or 15 years? Are we just going to end up with are we just going to end up with sort of 3 superpowers? It's sort of tripolar superpower arrangement where we have North America, Europe, and East Asia with sort of China as a center point. Is we're going to end up with this multipolar world where you have these sort of three competing things. And then you'll have Brazil, obviously, sort of like, which is a rising multipolar power, and India as a multipolar power. But like, but data collection and data surveillance and data technology have not necessarily equated to absolute control over the individual and the small local collective. So I think that as we move towards a more decentralized society, the local is where stuff's gonna really happen, right? That's what I think. I think that the local stuff is where the most power is, because it's the most real. In some countries, in some Commonwealth countries, it's called devolution, the sort of move from massive governments to local, like county level and city level and provincial sort of politics and bureaucratic power. I think that whenever it comes to data, because these databases are so massive, the real value in it is local, right? The real value is in the community, and what the community is able to collect about itself, what it's able to learn about itself, how it can share resources equitably, how it can interact with other communities, and I think that this sounds implausible right now, because that concentration of power and that concentration of wealth and that concentration of a sort of political authority and being able to impose its will around the world is still ongoing. But I do think that these are systems that depend on endless growth, and there's only so much planet, right? So we're at a point where, like, there's been the assumption for 15, 20 years now of perpetual growth, right? But like the global south, as you've been incorporating this technology, and you've been forcing this, as Silicon Valley in particular has been forcing this technology onto regions that are further and further away from the imperial core, if you will. It hasn't, they still depending on that perpetual growth model of adding more users, of generating more wealth, of feeding shareholders more value, and there's just no more. There's not any more for that model. So I actually think that they're going to be in a weakened position, because these systems are so dependent on perpetual growth, and I don't know if CEOs go to economics class and learn about the law of diminishing returns anymore, because it certainly doesn't seem like that they've encountered the idea that eventually the more times you tap that resource extraction button, you're not going to get much back anymore, and then eventually you're going to get nothing, right? And I think that that's where localities, where communities come in, it may be another 10 or 15 years before we get a really, really like serious discussion about data autonomy, about data sovereignty, about sort of privacy and data being a resource, about data, our data being essentially a resource in which we have some sovereignty and control over. But I do think that the limitation that these huge institutions have is that they are 100% dependent on extracting more and more from a planet that has less and less to give.
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel that those that are who trigger this kind of deployment of technology that we are talking about, no problem, don't actually think much about the long-term effects of what they do. And economic and political interests right now, I mean, they try to find some answers for the energy need and water need of these technologies. But so far, I think that the environmental concerns are losing badly. And I think it's also part of our of our mission, and to raise awareness about that and talk about these concerns and impacts and think about how to create these technological futures that we are talking about that are more aligned with human rights concerns, which includes environmental rights concerns. Although we are already seeing the impacts of these choices, right? And we are seeing them with, more and more with limited period of time between one disaster to the other. But yeah, and one thing that I wanted to mention is, although perhaps we still have to, although we resist algorithm control, and although we create forms to resist surveillance, the wealth that they created based on that definitely gave them political power. And if so, and this political power also lead to the decisions that we are talking about here. So, and we see in terms of autonomous and collective and community infrastructures, also in Global South and in Latin America, we have an important background in doing that, since community networks for connecting communities and Cryptorave, I want to celebrate that. In the program we had many sessions thinking about different ways of doing that, of doing the technology that we are discussing here, about its impacts and its concentration of power and its purpose, serving more to domination from important players and powerful players than from collective liberation and emancipation. But we, at this agenda here in Cryptorave, we have many examples on how to do differently. So I also wanted to celebrate that.
Speaking of the infrastructure, there are new protocols, there are new technologies, there are new methods that are constantly being developed, right? LoRaWAN is like a good example of a wide area network that's sort of local, that sort of operates with in which you have a peer-to-peer systems. Those could be, LoRaWAN systems could be, used in a village somewhere. You don't have to have an internet service provider with some of these new protocols. You don't have to when I know that there's been a focus for like 10 years now on decentralization. There's actually a more powerful, and more equitable and fair kind of system than decentralized. Because like decentralized, you can go from like a centralized system, which we have, you can sort of decentralize it, which we've seen a lot of especially in Web3 spaces and with cryptocurrency and technology and blockchain type technologies, like in the late 2010s, we sort of saw the limitations of that, of sort of It just sort of is an extension of the accumulation of wealth among the same people that have been made, that are already wealthy again. But like distribution, it's distributed systems that where the real power or the real change can happen. And distributed systems, peer-to-peer systems, we've sort of seen that it's taking time to sort of implement these protocols and implement these systems and to make them and to sort of make them accessible to people. But they do exist, and they are like, they didn't exist 10 years ago. Now, are they widespread? No, they're still experimental. But I think that in regions that are at the edge of the connected world today, we're seeing that these kinds of distributed infrastructures can be implemented. So it's not a hypothetical anymore. And then we're probably a decade or more away from these being widespread technologies, but they do exist. And I do think that this is one of the reasons why I have this optimism. Now, going back to the criticism that you have about, or the skepticism about my optimism, I understand that. I understand that people have a skepticism towards technology. I have that skepticism. The reason why I am trying to be optimistic is because I don't know how else we can be human without some kind of optimism. I'm not trying to say that that I do not see all of the problems with this stuff. It is precisely because of the fact that I should be exhausted. I should be tired. I should be pessimistic. I should be a quote unquote doomer about this stuff. And I have been, I have felt that, but it didn't really do anything for me. It didn't empower me. It didn't make me come up with anything new. It didn't make me feel like I could push back or resist to it. So like I want to just sort of say that there is a power, there is a sovereignty in having some kind of nugget of optimism in you, some kind of hope. I often, through my life experiences that I've had, people have often asked me like, "Oh, how is it that you still have hope?" Or you, there's also like, "You give me hope." People tell me that I give them hope, but the answer is like, I don't. Like, hope is not a thing that is like it's like an exchangeable thing. Like, it's not like it's not like I'm handing somebody over hope, right? No, it's a feeling. It's an instinct. It's a human impulse that we have. It's a spring that wells up from within us. And if we don't tap that spring and we don't exercise that hope and that optimism, then yeah, we're doomed. We're screwed. The universe will smite us out of existence. I don't want to believe that's the case. I may be wrong, and I'm probably wrong. I'm probably wrong to have this much optimism and this much hope in humanity, but I don't want to believe that.
I think your optimism is powerful. And it's because we believe in your optimism that we are here at Cryptorave. So we are actually thinking about the technologies that are able to or can enable distribution of power instead of concentration. And it's up to us to push the gears to make technology be the technology that you describe and we dream about, and not the technology that most of the times we face in our daily lives. So as we are going to the pathway to wrap up, do you have any other final remarks? Although you already did beautiful remarks right now, is there any other final note that you would like to share with us?
Sure. I mean, I always have notes that I can share. You know, this it has always been very meaningful for me to go out and interact with people in the global South, and to go to the places where people are doing the work and where people are extremely out there and things like that. And I, as the United States in particular, moves into an era of, you know, that regions of the global South and regions of you know, of parts of Northern Europe already have a lot of experience with this tendency, this increasing tendency and desire, because it's not like somebody is coming up out of nowhere and saying, I want to be the authoritarian in charge. We're going to install a hybrid authoritarian regime where you have some rights, but I have the power. There's a demand for this, right? There is a tendency to want an authoritarian, to bring some semblance or some feeling of control into our world, right? And so I just want to, like, it's not that authoritarianism is on the rise because authoritarians are on the rise. There's a demand for it. There is a tendency within people that they are exploiting and that they are tapping into, and technology is enabling them to be able to do this. Now, then, if we want to have you know, a more liberal and democratic society, we're going to have to grapple with the fact that there is that the society that we live in is a society increasingly where people are wanting some kind of they feel like their lives are out of control. Now, the authoritarians keep coming in and they keep saying, like, I will, you know, if as a strong leader, I will, you know, bring this, and they make a lot of promises, and then they take the institutions, they take the reins of the institutions. But I think that people who believe in liberalism, and people who believe in democracy, and people who believe in a free press, and that people who believe in freedom of speech, a lot of folks are going to have to grapple with the fact that, you know, yes, a significant chunk of people in the global North want somebody to come in and say, I will take care of you. I will be your guy. I will be your leader. I think it's important to recognize the fact that, you know, that there is a demand for people to turn over their digital sovereignty, to turn over their political sovereignty in this time of uncertainty and exhaustion, and you know, I think it's important to acknowledge that, you know, it's not that somebody has come in and saying, like, I'm in charge now. People are giving that.
Perhaps I'm also an optimism, but I think that this scenario also happens because we have faced years and years dismantling ties of solidarity that we used to have, and I think that we have to rebuild them, and also rebuild powerful utopias around them, and inspire, and utopias that we can inspire people so they can see themselves as part of a transformative collective projects instead of thinking that authoritarian projects are the best pathway for the issues and the problems and the fears they face. So, and I think that the discussion that we have here, and Cryptorave as part of that, is one element of building this inspiring utopia of a better future with technology as part of it. So, as you said, that you like to meaningfully engage with people, I tend to think that for now you're just looking at myself, so I wanted to do that so you can see everyone that is here listening. Yeah, and I want to, and now,
There you go.
big claps, aplausos para a nossa discussão aqui. Thank you very much for being here with us today. É isso, gente. Muito obrigada. Obrigada por estarem aqui hoje.